Hey there. What's your name?
Taylor Parker.
Taylor. Hey, my name's Chad Stansby. I'm a OSB agent up here, and I heard you brought your baby in. Did you give birth on the side of the road or something?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Right now, in the heart of Texas, there is a woman sitting alone in a 6-by-9-foot cell, waiting for the state to decide when and if she will die. Her name is Taylor Rene Parker, and she is one of the few women on Texas death row. For over 2 years, she's lived behind the red brick walls of the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, a maximum security facility designed for the condemned. The silence in her cell is broken only by the distant echo of steel doors and the shuffling boots of guards making their rounds. But what lies ahead for Taylor Parker isn't just another day behind bars. It's the slow, methodical countdown to an execution that may never come, or may come far too suddenly. What happens during those final 24 hours before a person is put to death? What does the state allow? What is denied? And what does the end of life actually look like in the Texas death chamber? This story is not just about the crime. It's about the consequence, the process, and the psychological weight of waiting for your own death, day after day, year after year. To understand why Parker is where she is now, we have to begin with the brutal murder that shocked a nation. In October 2020, in the quiet town of New Boston, Texas, a young pregnant mother named Reagan Simmons Hancock was violently attacked in her own home. She was 21 years old, 34 weeks pregnant, and excited to welcome her new daughter into the world. But that morning, someone she trusted walked through her front door, with a scalpel and a hammer in hand. The crime was as calculated as it was savage. Reagan was bludgeoned, her skull fractured from repeated blows. She was still alive when her abdomen was sliced open from hip to hip. Her unborn baby, Braxlyn Sage Hancock, was forcibly removed from her womb. Parker, the woman who had pretended for months to be pregnant herself, left Reagan for dead and drove away holding a child she had no way to care for. By the time the trial ended, the jury needed just 1 hour to convict her. The judge's sentence was final: death. This documentary will take you inside what really happens after a death sentence is handed down, from the isolation of death row to the exact minute-by-minute procedures of execution day. No myths, no dramatization, just facts. This is the final 24 hours of Taylor Rene Parker, a woman whose lies ended in unthinkable violence, and whose final moment may already be scheduled, even if she doesn't know it yet. Before the headlines, before the courtroom gasps, before her name became linked to one of the most horrifying crimes in Texas history, Taylor Rene Parker was just another woman living in small-town America. Born on March 12, 1992, Parker grew up in Northeast Texas, in a region made up of rural counties, close-knit communities, and quiet neighborhoods where everyone seemed to know everyone. To many who knew her, Parker came off as outgoing, talkative, and eager to be liked. She was the kind of person who smiled often, complimented others generously, and inserted herself into conversations with confidence. But beneath that warm exterior, there were signs of instability, cracks in the image she worked so hard to maintain. Family members, former partners, and acquaintances would later describe her as someone obsessed with appearances, particularly when it came to relationships, family status, and motherhood. Parker had 2 children from a previous relationship, but after undergoing a medically necessary hysterectomy, she could no longer conceive. Those close to her say she never fully accepted it. By 2020, Parker was in a relationship with a man she wanted to marry. But that relationship had one unspoken condition. He believed she was pregnant with his child. For nearly 10 months, Parker carried out an elaborate deception. She faked ultrasounds. She wore pregnancy prosthetics. She posted updates online. She even hosted a gender reveal party, surrounded by friends and family who genuinely believed she was preparing to welcome a baby. In reality, Parker was crafting a deadly lie, one that would require a baby by a specific due date. And with that due date approaching, the pressure to produce a child became overwhelming. That pressure would lead her to Reagan Simmons Hancock, a young woman from New Boston who was 34 weeks pregnant and due just days before Parker's supposed delivery. The 2 women had developed a casual friendship. Reagan had even taken Parker's wedding and maternity photos. She had no reason to suspect the danger that was coming. At trial, prosecutors painted Parker as a master manipulator, someone who knew how to charm, lie, and plan with chilling precision. They described a woman who not only committed a crime of unthinkable violence, but did so with clear intent, all to maintain a fantasy she had spent months building. This wasn't a woman who snapped. This was a woman who plotted, and that distinction is what would eventually lead a jury to recommend the death penalty. To the outside world, Taylor Rene Parker once appeared to be a doting mother, a supportive friend, and a loving partner. But behind closed doors, she was preparing for a crime that would destroy lives and seal her own fate. The crime. It was a quiet fall morning in New Boston, Texas, on October 9, 2020. The kind of morning when families were just beginning their routines, kids were still in pajamas, and the world outside hadn't fully woken up. Inside her modest home, 21-year-old Reagan Simmons Hancock was preparing for a new chapter in life. She was 34 weeks pregnant, glowing with anticipation, and just days away from giving birth to a baby girl she had already named Braxlyn Sage. But while Reagan was folding baby clothes and thinking about her growing family, Taylor Rene Parker was finishing a far more sinister checklist. She wasn't packing a hospital bag, she was packing a scalpel, a hammer, and a fake hospital ID. And she wasn't headed to the maternity ward, she was headed to Reagan's house. What happened next would horrify not just a town, but the entire country. Parker arrived at Reagan's home that morning under the pretense of a friendly visit. There was no forced entry, no alarm. Reagan opened the door, likely smiling, unaware she had just let in her own killer. Once inside, Parker launched a brutal attack. Using the hammer, she struck Reagan in the head multiple times, with such force that medical examiners later testified her skull was crushed into her brain. But Reagan was still alive. As her 3-year-old daughter remained somewhere inside the home, Reagan fought to survive, knowing her unborn child was in danger. Parker, undeterred and calculated, began cutting into Reagan's abdomen from hip to hip, performing a crude cesarean section with the scalpel she had brought. Blood was everywhere. But even in agony, Reagan resisted. She clawed at Parker's arms, leaving behind deep scratches. But the damage had already been done. Her baby was gone, and her strength was fading. Parker wrapped the baby in a blanket and left the house, leaving Reagan's lifeless body behind. She got into her car and drove toward Oklahoma, where she eventually pulled into a hospital parking lot, posing as a woman who had just given birth. She cradled the stolen infant in her arms and told hospital staff she had just gone into labor roadside. But something was off. The umbilical cord had been clamped in a way that made no medical sense. There was no afterbirth, no physical signs of labor on Parker herself.
Looked like a baby came out of there. It looked like she had a baby.
It doesn't?
No.
Okay.
Having been deprived of medical care for too long, she died not long after arrival. Back at the crime scene, Reagan's mother made the discovery no parent should ever have to endure. She arrived to pick Reagan up for a doctor's appointment and found the door unlocked, blood trailing across the floor, and her daughter unresponsive in the living room. The scene was gruesome beyond words. Investigators and seasoned emergency responders were visibly shaken. A young mother butchered in her own home, a baby torn from her body, and a killer who was now playing the role of a new mom in a hospital an hour away. It didn't take long for law enforcement to connect the dots. Surveillance footage, phone data, fake ultrasound images, and Parker's own search history told the full story. She had researched how to deliver premature babies, how to perform C-sections, and how to lie about labor. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the final step in a plan that had taken months to build. Prosecutors would later describe it as one of the most premeditated and grotesque murders ever tried in Texas court. They didn't need motive beyond one word: desperation. Parker needed a baby, and she was willing to kill for one. The investigation and arrest. When Taylor Rene Parker walked into McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma, she was calm, composed, and clutching a newborn baby wrapped in a towel. She told staff she had just given birth on the side of the road, but the medical team knew something wasn't right. Her clothing showed no signs of labor. Her body didn't appear to have gone through childbirth. And most alarmingly, the infant she carried, Braxlyn Sage Hancock, was pale, unresponsive, and missing the vital signs of a freshly delivered newborn. Doctors and nurses worked quickly, trying to resuscitate the baby. But it was too late. The child died shortly after arrival. Meanwhile, local police were already responding to a brutal murder back in New Boston, Texas.
Where's she?
She is in the room. She's
I'll let her leave.
no.
Thank God. She's on the phone now with her boyfriend, so I'll try to sidetrack her a little bit.
How are you today?
He's an hour away.
I can sit with her.
Well, that's what Chad wants to do.
Just talk with the ER doctor. They took blood work, HCG levels, which is a hormone. It's not showing she was pregnant.
Yeah, she said it was correct.
And they're saying that the placenta, they can send the placenta off for test and whether it comes back to her or not. She won't let her do a vaginal exam to make sure she's not hemorrhaging. So she won't let her.
Hey there. What's your name?
Taylor Parker.
Taylor. Hey, my name's Chad Sansby. I'm a OSBI agent up here, and I heard you brought your baby in. Did you give birth on the side of the road or something?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
Inside, police found a scalpel, surgical gloves, fake hospital paperwork, and prosthetic pregnancy bellies. On her phone were dozens of disturbing search queries. How to perform a cesarean, how to fake a pregnancy, how to deliver a baby at 35 weeks. She had even researched how long a baby could survive outside the womb without medical help. In interviews with detectives, Parker tried to keep up the charade. She insisted the baby was hers. But within hours, DNA tests disproved her story. The infant's DNA matched Reagan Simmons Hancock. And Parker's digital footprint told investigators everything else they needed to know. Her Google searches, her fake sonograms, her text messages to friends, her gender reveal party. All of it was fabricated. Parker wasn't just caught. She was caught with evidence in her hand, driving across state lines with a baby that didn't belong to her, a baby she had violently stolen by murdering her own friend. For law enforcement, it was a case solved quickly. But for two grieving families, it was only the beginning of a long, painful road through the Texas justice system. Trial, conviction, and death sentence. By the time Taylor Rene Parker stood trial in September 2022, the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution had compiled a case so detailed, so methodically constructed, that even seasoned courtroom observers described it as one of the most open and shut capital murder cases Texas had seen in years. But despite the mountain of proof, the emotional toll of the trial would prove staggering. Held in Bowie County, the trial lasted 3 weeks, drawing national media attention and a packed courtroom each day. Prosecutors painted Parker as a master manipulator, someone who faked an entire pregnancy for nearly a year, orchestrated a brutal murder, and stole a baby she had no means of caring for. The jury listened to the harrowing details of the attack. How Parker crushed Reagan Simmons Hancock's skull with a hammer, how she sliced open her abdomen while Reagan was still alive, and how she left her bleeding out on the floor, all while Reagan's 3-year-old child was in the house. Forensic experts testified that Braxlyn Sage Hancock had been born alive, but only barely. The baby's chance of survival had been stolen the moment Parker left the house without medical attention. Over 142 witnesses were called to the stand. Friends, doctors, law enforcement, digital forensic experts. Every one of them helped reinforce the same truth. This was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of planning. In a chilling moment during the proceedings, the court was shown Parker's fake ultrasound images, her Google search history, and even the maternity photos she had staged. The deception went beyond lying. It was theater. When it came time for the defense, there was little they could say to undo the damage. Parker's attorneys argued mental instability, pointing to untreated psychological trauma, her hysterectomy, and a desperate need for love and validation. But the jury wasn't swayed. On October 3, 2022, the verdict came swiftly. After just 1 hour of deliberation, Parker was found guilty of capital murder. A month later, on November 9th, the same jury reconvened to determine her fate. After just over an hour, they returned with their decision: death. As the sentence was read aloud, the courtroom fell silent. The judge's final words were clear: Take her to death row. Taylor Rene Parker became the 7th woman to receive a death sentence in Texas since the state reinstated capital punishment in 1976. In the eyes of the law, her fate was now sealed. But in the state of Texas, where death penalty cases can drag through appeals for decades, that sentence marked the beginning of another long and uncertain chapter. One lived in isolation, behind locked steel doors, under the weight of time and memory. Texas death row for women. After her sentencing, Taylor Rene Parker was transferred to the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, the state's designated facility for female death row inmates. Unlike the high-profile Polunsky Unit, where male death row prisoners endure 23 hours of solitary confinement and some of the harshest conditions in the country, Mountain View is quieter, more sterile. But that doesn't mean it's humane. The women's death row wing, also known as the O'Daniel Unit, holds just a handful of inmates at any given time. As of 2025, only 6 women sit on death row in Texas, making Parker part of a very rare and exclusive group. In fact, of the nearly 600 executions carried out since Texas reinstated the death penalty in 1976, only 6 have been women. Parker spends 22 to 23 hours a day inside a 60-square-foot cell, barely the size of a walk-in closet. Her bed is a thin mattress on a metal frame bolted to the wall. There's a toilet, a stainless steel sink, and a small shelf to hold legal documents or religious materials. The walls are solid concrete. There are no windows, just steel bars and fluorescent light. Prison officials describe the unit as maximum security with minimal human contact. Parker's interactions are limited to brief words with correctional officers, rare visits from her legal team, and a few monitored phone calls. Just 4 per year, 5 minutes each. Every move she makes, whether it's walking to the recreation yard or showering, is controlled, timed, and escorted. Recreation, when allowed, is solitary. Inmates are led, one at a time, to a 10-yard by 50-yard concrete yard enclosed by fencing and razor wire. There they can pace, shoot a basketball alone, or sit on a bench beneath a single tree. No group activities, no conversation, no privacy. Unlike their male counterparts at Polunsky, who are fed cold meals in their cells during lockdown, the women at Mountain View receive hot meals and are allowed to eat in a small, supervised common area. There, they can watch state-controlled television programming, but only if they agree, as a group, on what to watch. It's a small privilege, and one that often sparks conflict. Parker also has access to a limited prison library and religious services if she requests them. Some death row inmates turn to faith. Others remain withdrawn. According to prison psychologists, the mental toll of death row is unique and devastating. Inmates experience deep isolation, depression, insomnia, hallucinations, and in some cases, complete psychological breakdowns. What makes Parker's situation more complex is that she exists in a kind of limbo. Her sentence is death, but no execution date has been set. Texas death penalty cases often spend years, sometimes decades, in appeals. Some inmates wait 18 to 30 years before their sentence is carried out, and some die of old age before that day ever comes. For now, Parker waits. Every morning, she wakes up to the same routine, the same cement walls, the same fluorescent ceiling, the same echoes of steel doors closing up and down the corridor. Her name may be forgotten by the news cycle, but inside the O'Daniel Unit, time moves slow. And for those sentenced to die, time is the heaviest punishment of all. Final 24 hours. When the state of Texas decides that an execution will go forward, the clock starts ticking in a very specific, carefully regulated way. For Taylor Rene Parker, if that day ever arrives, her final 24 hours will unfold like clockwork, down to the minute, and with no possibility of escape. At 6 a.m. on execution day, she'll be awakened by guards and served breakfast. Not a custom meal, but whatever is on the standard prison menu that morning. That's because Texas abolished the last meal tradition in 2011, after an inmate ordered a lavish feast and then refused to eat it. From that moment forward, condemned prisoners eat what everyone else does. No exceptions. Shortly after breakfast, she'll be informed that all pending appeals have been denied and that the execution will proceed as scheduled. That news alone has broken many inmates before their final hour. There's no bargaining left, no court left to convince. Just time to prepare for the inevitable. Around 10 a.m., visitation begins, but only for pre-approved family members and legal representatives. These visits are conducted behind thick glass, with voices exchanged through a phone receiver. They are emotionally devastating. Loved ones struggle to say goodbye. Inmates attempt to remain composed, knowing these are the last faces they'll ever see outside of prison walls. By 2 p.m., visitation ends and all clemency petitions must be finalized. If the governor does not intervene, an extremely rare occurrence in Texas, then the execution remains scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp. At approximately 4 p.m., Parker would be offered the chance to make final phone calls, usually to immediate family or spiritual advisors. These calls are monitored but not recorded. Then she will be escorted to a holding cell just 30 feet from the execution chamber. At that point, there is no turning back. During the final hours, she'll be strip-searched, fingerprinted, and given clean TDCJ-issued clothing. She may speak with a chaplain, who serves as both spiritual counselor and emotional guide. Many condemned women choose to pray. Others sit in silence. The chaplain traditionally escorts the inmate to the death chamber, though recent Supreme Court rulings have altered whether they can remain inside during the injection. The transfer to the Huntsville unit, home of Texas's death chamber, is done quietly and under heavy guard. The exact route and timing are kept secret for security reasons. Parker will travel in a secure vehicle alongside medical records, legal documents, and her execution packet. Once inside the chamber, she will be strapped to a padded gurney, lying flat with her arms extended. Witnesses are brought into 2 separate rooms, one for the victim's family and one for her own, if they choose to attend. A media representative is also present to document the event. Texas uses a single drug, pentobarbital, a fast-acting barbiturate, that renders the prisoner unconscious in seconds. Once the warden gives the signal, a team of anonymous executioners administers the injection from behind a wall. The process is quiet, clinical, practiced. In most cases, death is declared within 10 to 15 minutes. Before the injection, Parker will have the opportunity to deliver her final statement, either spoken aloud, read by the chaplain, or written in advance. Some inmates use this moment to apologize. Others maintain innocence. A few remain silent. Regardless of what she says, those words will be recorded, transcribed, and archived as part of the public record. For Taylor Rene Parker, the moment of execution will mark the end of one of Texas's most disturbing criminal cases. A case defined not only by its brutality, but by its deliberate planning, its emotional betrayal, and its devastating outcome. And for the family of Reagan Simmons Hancock, it will be the closest thing to closure they may ever receive. The final statement and execution. When the final moments arrive, Taylor Rene Parker will be asked one question that only she can answer. Do you have any last words? In Texas, this moment comes just before the execution begins. The inmate is strapped to the gurney, IV lines are inserted, witnesses are watching through glass, and silence hangs heavy in the chamber. It is here, just seconds from death, that the condemned is given the floor, perhaps for the very last time in their life, to speak their truth, offer remorse, or maintain innocence. Parker, like all Texas death row inmates, will have had time to consider her final words. She can choose to speak freely, say nothing at all, or write a prepared statement to be read aloud by the prison chaplain. That choice is hers. But whatever she says will be recorded and preserved as part of the official record. And for the family of Reagan Simmons Hancock, those words will be the last sounds they hear from the woman who destroyed their lives. But Parker's crime was not impulsive. It was planned, intimate, and targeted at someone who once called her a friend. That alone raises the question, will she take responsibility, or will she hold on to denial, even in her final breath? Unlike most condemned inmates, Parker's lies were caught in real time. She was arrested with the baby in her arms, carrying stolen hospital forms, fake sonograms, and surgical tools in her car. Her defense never truly argued innocence. They focused instead on trauma, mental health, and desperation. But the jury saw something else: intent. And they answered with the only sentence Texas allows for capital murder: death. When the warden signals the start of the execution, Parker's words, if any, will have already been spoken. The injection will begin. Pentobarbital will flow through her veins. She will lose consciousness within 10 seconds, her chest rising slower, her heartbeat fading. The witnesses will watch, the media will record the time, and a prison doctor will pronounce her dead around 6:20 p.m. The entire process rarely takes more than 20 minutes, and then it will be over. Taylor Rene Parker will be removed from the chamber and transferred to a state mortuary. Her body will be released to her family or buried at state expense. Her prison file will be closed. But for Reagan's family and the child who never had a chance to live, the aftermath will continue for the rest of their lives. Bookmark. No final statement can undo what was done, but in death, the silence Parker leaves behind may speak louder than anything she ever said. Aftermath. Long after the courtroom emptied and the media moved on, two families were left to live with the consequences of Taylor Rene Parker's actions. On one side, the family of Reagan Simmons Hancock, a mother, daughter, and friend, was shattered beyond repair. On the other, Parker's own children and relatives were left trying to reconcile the woman they once knew with the horrifying reality of what she had done. For Reagan's mother, every milestone is now a reminder of what was stolen. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries are no longer joyful. They're painful markers of absence. She was the one who discovered her daughter's body, a sight that no parent should ever have to endure. And she lives with the trauma of that morning every single day. Reagan's 3-year-old daughter, who was in the home during the murder, is now growing up without her mother. The emotional damage inflicted on that child, too young to fully understand what she witnessed, may never fully heal. And the baby that Reagan had been so excited to meet, Braxlyn Sage, never had a chance to take her first breath, never saw her mother's face, never left the hospital alive. The legal process that followed brought no real comfort. While Parker was convicted and sentenced to death, the reality of Texas's appeals system means the case could drag on for decades. Each new motion, each hearing, each piece of paperwork forces Reagan's family to relive the nightmare. Justice, in capital cases, is rarely swift and even less often final. But Parker's family also carries a different kind of grief. Her 2 children, who had nothing to do with the crime, now live with the burden of having a mother on death row. Her parents, relatives, and loved ones must navigate the shame, confusion, and sorrow of watching someone they raised become the face of one of the most heinous crimes in recent memory. For them, it's a mix of disbelief and devastation. The public often forgets that the fallout of a murder isn't limited to the victim. Entire families fracture, communities mourn, children grow up with unanswered questions. For some, the death penalty represents closure. For others, it only deepens the wound. What cannot be debated, however, is that 2 lives were lost that day in New Boston, one violently, the other slowly, through lies and delusion. And in the aftermath, 2 families were sentenced to lifetimes of grief, with no appeal, no verdict, and no sentence that could ever truly make things right. The case of Taylor Rene Parker forces us to confront the darkest extremes of human behavior, the power of deception, the fragility of trust, and the devastation left behind when someone chooses to live a lie, no matter the cost. What began as a fabricated pregnancy became a countdown to murder, and what Parker stole that day wasn't just a life. It was a future, a family, and a sense of safety that her community may never fully recover. In the end, the courts delivered the harshest sentence the state of Texas allows: death. But whether that sentence brings justice or vengeance is something only you can decide. For some, the death penalty represents accountability, a clear message that certain crimes are beyond forgiveness. For others, it raises questions about mercy, mental health, and whether a life sentence might be punishment enough. In Parker's case, the cruelty was undeniable. The planning was extensive. The damage, irreversible. Yet even now, she sits on death row with no execution date, waiting out a legal process that could take decades to complete. Appeals, petitions, hearings, each one delaying a sentence that may never be carried out. In Texas, justice moves slowly and sometimes not at all. But while Parker waits, the families she affected live with the fallout every day. Reagan Simmons Hancock, a 21-year-old mother full of love and hope, is gone. Her unborn baby, Braxlyn, never had a chance to live. A young child lost her mother, a husband lost his wife, and a town lost its peace. At the same time, Parker's own children will grow up with a mother remembered not for love or kindness, but for the unthinkable violence she committed. They too are victims in this tragedy, innocent bystanders in a story they never asked to be part of. This case is more than a headline. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it plans baby showers. Sometimes it takes photos of the very woman it's planning to kill. And so we ask the question again. Is justice truly served by death, or does the pain only deepen with time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the death penalty is the right punishment in cases like this? Should Parker's sentence stand, or should life in prison be enough? Before we end, let's take a moment to remember Reagan Simmons Hancock and Braxlyn Sage, the real victims of this story. May their names outlive the one who took their lives.